Jon stood on the terrace of Meereen's Great Pyramid, gazing out over the sprawl of the freed city. Dawn's first glow touched the sky, painting the horizon in pink and gold hues. The wind carried the scents of spice and fresh bread from the street vendors setting up stalls in the courtyard below. For a time, he simply watched as freed men and women hurried along to their tasks or paused to greet one another, the warmth of their interactions a daily marvel in what had once been a bastion of cruelty. Jon's thoughts drifted to how far they had come, forging a freed confederation across 3 once-oppressed cities, unifying them with the promise of dragons and unwavering guardianship. The freed vow that bound him to Daenerys Targaryen lent a subtle shift in their roles, co-rulers in all but name, though they had carefully avoided crowning themselves. The freed recognized their leadership through gratitude, not subjugation. He felt the brush of fur against his calf, Ghost, the direwolf who had been resurrected by the Red Priests. Ghost remained an ever-watchful presence. Jon knelt, stroking the direwolf's ears. The soft hush of the city waking up momentarily soothed Jon's restless mind. Soon, the day's tasks would swallow them again. Freed petitions, trade negotiations, vigilance against infiltration. There was no sense of permanent rest, only a fragile calm that they had learned never to take for granted. Yet the freed thrived under that calm, and each day added weight to the notion that Slaver's Bay might truly be free of chains for good. A light step behind him made him rise. Daenerys approached, wearing a pale green dress trimmed with subtle dragon motifs. Silver gold hair fell in loose waves, though one small braid signified her status as a Targaryen. He greeted her with a gentle look. She leaned over the terrace railing, letting the wind stir her hair, the new silver band on her finger glinting in the dawn. "You're up earlier than usual," she murmured, voice still touched by the softness of sleep. "I needed the quiet," he admitted, turning to face her. "Each day, freed Confederation demands more from us. Sometimes I recall the quiet of Winterfell's mornings, though it feels distant now." She placed a hand on his arm. "I know the feeling. I remember when each dawn came with the dread of fleeing from one uncertain place to another, under Viserys' insistence that we reclaim our birthright. Now we stand guardians of a realm we've built for the freed, not for ourselves." Her eyes flicked to the city's skyline. "I never imagined it would be so complicated, yet so fulfilling." He kissed her knuckles, mindful of the freed staff tidying the terrace at a discreet distance. Since their vow, they had not hidden their closeness, trusting that freed men and women respected the sincerity of their union. Indeed, freed watchers took comfort in seeing the Targaryen pair united, embodying the stability they brought. "We manage day by day. Let's see what the morning brings." The morning brought a barrage of minor issues. Freed scribes approached them with requests to finalize a new system of rotating freed militias, ensuring each city contributed to a central pool of troops that could move swiftly to any threatened region. The impetus for that plan stemmed from Jon's confrontation with Basilisk pirates, reminding everyone that scattered local forces were less effective than a coordinated freed confederation approach. Daenerys swiftly approved the measure after reading the scribes' proposals, and Jon contributed suggestions on how to incorporate local freed captains into the command structure. The freed nodded enthusiastically, praising the combined leadership approach. Midway through these consultations, Daario Naharis burst into the hall, a grin splitting his face. He bowed exaggeratedly, then announced, "My queen, my prince, fresh tidings from the Painted Hills. Khal Nakaro's Khalasar has indeed moved on, crossing beyond freed territory without any sign of raiding or abduction. Freed scouts confirm the villages remain unharmed. Looks like your pointed words, and the show of dragons, did the job." He let out a hearty chuckle. Daenerys exhaled relief, recalling how close they had come to a clash. Jon nodded thanks to Daario, commending the freed scouts for their vigilance. The freed confederation's ability to dissuade a Khalasar without bloodshed was another testament to the carefully balanced might and mercy they practiced. Daario continued, more soberly, "However, we do have a small concern in Yunkai. Freed caravans complain of a group of local thugs who style themselves the Grey Hands. They haven't resorted to violence yet, but they loudly claim freed governance is weak, that Targaryen rule is overshadowing freed independence. The Freed Council there is divided on how to address them. Some want to arrest them outright, others fear it might spark a riot. Daenerys rubbed her temple. We keep facing pockets of dissent. Freed men who suspect we've replaced old masters with ourselves. We must handle that delicately. Our freed vow stands for no tyranny, but it's easy for some to misinterpret the presence of dragons and a protective confederation as a form of subjugation. She sighed. Let them speak as long as they don't incite violence. We'll watch them. Ensure they don't undermine freed unity. Jon agreed. We can instruct the Freed Council in Yunkai to remain calm. If the Grey Hands cross into sabotage or collusion with slavers, we intervene. Until then, let them talk. Freed men have the right to question leadership, as we promised. That's the difference from tyranny. Dario inclined his head, respecting the approach. As you wish. I'll send a messenger to Yunkai's Freed Council with those instructions. Perhaps the Grey Hands will fizzle out once they see freed governance continues to function. Torem, observing from the side, offered a thoughtful look. Dissent can be healthy, yet we must be watchful that it doesn't transform into hidden conspiracies. Freed men might legitimately fear the ghost of tyranny, but if slaver loyalists exploit that fear, it becomes a dagger pointed at our hearts. Daenerys nodded gravely. The freed staff resumed activity, concluding the day's consults. As evening approached, she and Jon reconvened in a smaller courtyard near the pyramid's western flank. The marble pillars glowed in the setting sun. Freed children laughed in the adjacent plaza, chasing each other with wooden toys shaped like dragons. Ghost loped after them, a gentle giant that no longer terrified freed crowds, though they respected his supernatural aura. Regal soared overhead, chasing fleeting insects in the last daylight. Daenerys watched the scene with a quiet smile, recalling how freed children once cowered in fear. Now they thrived. She turned to Jon. Sometimes it feels we've done the impossible. He squeezed her hand. We had help, freed themselves who yearned to shape their destiny. We only guided them, and each day we discover new threats or complications. The letter from Ned Stark still lingers in my mind. Robert's court might shift. That could lead to infiltration or sabotage from Westeros. Or they might do nothing. We can't be sure. She nodded, eyes darkening momentarily. Yes, for now we remain vigilant. If Robert truly sees us as a threat, we must rely on Ned Stark's influence to keep him in check. Should that fail, we face war across the sea. The Freed Confederation is strong, but a full-scale Westerosi invasion would be no small matter, especially if they muster lords from all 7 kingdoms. The Freed might not stand a chance unless the rest of Essos also sees reason to ally with us. Jon's gaze flicked to the horizon. We can't fight a war with dragons alone if half the known world arrays against us. That might tear the Freed Confederation apart from within. We must avoid it unless forced. He paused. Have you considered forging some alliances with foreign powers like the Summer Islands, or even some of the free cities that never relied heavily on slave trade? If they see the Freed Confederation as a legitimate trade partner, they might not join any Westerosi aggression. Daenerys let out a contemplative sigh. Yes, I've considered it. Perhaps we should dispatch envoys to Bravos, the most anti-slavery of the free cities. They might be open to a pact. But for now, let's gather more intelligence. We can't stretch ourselves too thin, chasing alliances when freed stability remains our priority. Night fell, bringing a lull. Daenerys and Jon dined with freed council members in the pyramid's dining hall. The meal was simple. Spiced fish, lentils, fresh flatbreads. Freed harpers played gentle tunes. Daenerys and Jon engaged in cordial talk, reaffirming plans for improved farmland irrigation. Yet their thoughts lingered on the potential storms beyond the horizon. After dinner, they parted from the freed leaders, seeking the relative quiet of their private quarters, where Ghost dozed at the door. Another day passed in this delicate dance of leadership. Weeks blurred by, each day forging new developments in freed society. Freed courts established property laws, freed engineers tested new irrigation channels, freed priests of R'hllor and other faiths coexisted in relative harmony, urging cooperation. Jon occasionally soared over farmland with Shadowfire, verifying no bandits threatened the roads. Daenerys convened freed councils, ensuring no faction felt neglected. The freed vow that joined them stood as a cornerstone. Two Targaryens forging a realm without slavery, bridging might and compassion. The freed revered them for it, though some voices, like the Grey Hands in Yunkai, kept murmuring warnings against centralized power. Yet even they recognized that so far, the freed confederation had brought more stability than any had dared hope. One afternoon, Tormund approached them in the pyramid's grand foyer with unusual urgency. He bowed, explaining that a traveler from Lys, a priestess named Malia, had arrived, claiming to bear crucial tidings. She said the freed confederation's success had stirred interest in Lys, where a new wave of exiled slavers plotted revenge. Tormund suspected she was genuine, but it merited caution. Daenerys agreed to meet the priestess in a small audience chamber, with Jon and freed guards present. Daario hovered to one side, hand on his curved blade. Malia entered, robed in deep red. She was tall, her hair bound in gold ribbons. She greeted them with a respectful bow, the accent of Lys coloring her voice. "My queen, my prince," she began, eyes flicking between Daenerys and Jon. "I come from Lys under the auspices of certain devout followers of R'hllor, who see the freed confederation's light. But not everyone in Lys welcomes it. A group of wealthy ex-slavers has conspired to hire mercenaries, perhaps to sabotage freed trade routes or strike your cities unawares. My informants say they call themselves the Iron Scepter, a hidden circle that pines for the old slave markets." Daenerys's jaw tightened. "We suspected foreign slavers might eventually stir. The freed confederation ended their lucrative trade here, and they want it back. How large is this Iron Scepter?" Malia inclined her head, voice grave. "Their numbers aren't fully known, but they are wealthy. They have gold enough to hire multiple companies of sellswords. Possibly they might attempt to sow discord in freed society, funding local malcontents or launching surprise raids. I fear they might also try to align with any disgruntled freed factions like the Grey Hands, twisting legitimate dissent into chaos." Jon exhaled, exchanging a knowing look with Daenerys. "So the threat we anticipated from beyond Slaver's Bay might be materializing. If these ex-slavers unify under the Iron Scepter's gold, we risk infiltration or direct attacks. We cannot be complacent." Malia nodded. "I share this because the Lord of Light's flame guided me to warn you. Lys officially denies slavery, but some Lyseni still yearn for the old trade. The Iron Scepter lurks in shadow. If you act swiftly, perhaps you can expose their plans or discourage them." Daario frowned. "Expose them how? We have no direct presence in Lys. We can't just sail there with dragons, especially if we're not sure who stands with us or against us. That might provoke war." Daenerys pursed her lips. "We might dispatch discreet envoys, freed or red priests, to gather intelligence. Lys is not monolithic. Some Lyseni might resent the Iron Scepter. If we can isolate that group, we avoid punishing the innocent." Jon agreed. "Yes, a light touch. Meanwhile, we fortify Freed Bay, strengthen coastal defenses, ensure no Sellsword fleets can slip in, warn freed councils that infiltration might intensify. If necessary, Shadowfire can deter any brazen assault." Tormund placed a hand over his chest, thanking Malia for her bravery in bringing this news. She inclined her head again, promising further updates if her Lyseni contacts learned more. Daenerys declared they would offer her shelter for as long as needed. The freed guards escorted her to guest quarters, leaving Daenerys, Jon, Tormund, and Daario to strategize. They concluded that a small freed envoy to Lys might prove wise, someone who could operate under the guise of normal trade negotiations, gleaning intelligence about the Iron Scepter. Daario volunteered, but Daenerys hesitated, wanting him close in case infiltration struck at home. Ultimately, they agreed on sending 2 freed ambassadors with a handful of discreet guards. Tormund recommended including a red priest to lend spiritual credibility. Jon approved. The freed scribes drew up instructions for how to proceed in Lys. Over the next week, the freed ambassadors prepared for the journey, quietly gathering funds and forging cover stories as legitimate merchants seeking open trade. Daenerys and Jon continued daily freed governance, all the while ensuring the ambassadors had every resource needed. As they departed Meereen aboard a modest ship, the freed Confederation watched with cautious hope that the Iron Scepter's threat could be unveiled before it grew monstrous. Daenerys stood on the dock, waving them off, heart heavy with the knowledge that each new success seemed to summon new enemies. Meanwhile, Meereen's freed councils flourished. Freed scribes established a new archive in the pyramid's lower halls, chronicling the freed Confederation's founding. Freed artisans adorned walls with murals depicting dragons shattering chains. The freed vow that bound Daenerys and Jon also inspired small celebrations in each city, a living symbol that Targaryen guardianship was anchored in more than raw power. Freed gossip whispered about how the Targaryens balanced might with compassion, how their union had ushered in prosperity unseen in Slaver's Bay. Some freed even predicted that Daenerys might bear an heir eventually, though neither Targaryen publicly discussed such matters. They had enough to handle without dwelling on children, though the freed would cheer any sign of dynastic continuity. One evening, as twilight cloaked the city, Daenerys finished hearing petitions in the throne room, a simpler dais than the old slaver's seat, with rugs and cushions for freed to sit at her level. Freed men and women trickled out, satisfied or at least listened to. Jon joined her, explaining that freed cavalry discovered no sign of infiltration near the Basilisk Isles route. Torrim added that a mild plague had broken out in a small fishing village south of Yunkai, but freed healers were containing it. For once, the day's troubles felt manageable. They walked through the corridors toward their private quarters, freed guards bowing in respect. Outside, the night air pressed warm against their faces. Ghost trotted ahead, tail flicking. The hush of the stars beckoned them to the pyramid's upper terrace, where they could watch regal and Viserion chase flocks of bats. Drogon perched on a half-crumbled tower, letting out lazy snarls at passing gulls. Shadowfire soared above the city's outer ramparts, a black omen to any who might harbor ill intent. Daenerys leaned on the railing, turning to Jon with a faint smile. Another day ended without disaster. I suppose we should be grateful. He mirrored her smile, resting an arm around her shoulders. Yes, each peaceful day for the freed is a victory in itself. I recall how we spent so long bracing for crisis after crisis. A lull feels strange, but welcome. He hesitated, voice dropping. Though I wonder how long it can last. The undead rumors in Westeros, the Iron Scepter in Lys, eventually, we may face a storm. For now, let's savor this calm. She reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Agreed. Let's not borrow tomorrow's troubles. We built freed Confederation precisely for these people to live without chains or constant fear. If a war or calamity arises, we stand ready. And if it never comes, we keep forging a brighter life for everyone here. They stood quietly a moment, relishing the night's hush. In the distance, freed lamplights twinkled across Meereen's streets, a tapestry of human stories unshackled from the old cruelty. Dragons soared among the stars, guardians that once terrified the world, but now shielded freed from oppression. Below, freed voices drifted in snatches of song or gentle conversation. Daenerys and Jon watched it all, bound by shared vow, shaped by a destiny neither had fully foreseen. The next morning, freed scribes hurried to Daenerys and Jon with news that an envoy from Volantis had arrived, seeking an audience. The envoy's credentials appeared legitimate. Volantene merchants representing certain factions, presumably curious about the freed Confederation's new trade routes. Daenerys recalled how Volantis had a complicated relationship with slavery, with parts of the city still clinging to old laws. Nonetheless, an official overture signaled recognition of Targaryen-ruled Freed Bay. She agreed to host them in a modest reception hall, determined to present freed policies but remain wary of hidden agendas. That afternoon, the Volantene envoy arrived, a trio of middle-aged men in fine silks, escorted by a handful of guards wearing a curious insignia of a green tiger. Freed watchers kept an eye on them as they entered the pyramid's reception hall. Jon stood to Daenerys' right, Grey Worm and a few unsullied flanking them. Ghost rested near Jon's boots, panting in the heat. The Volantine delegates bowed in measured courtesy. Their leader, who introduced himself as Magister Ilario Talro, presented a small chest of spices and exotic fabrics. A freed scribe stepped forward to accept, verifying these were indeed mere gifts, not concealed contraband. Daenerys offered a polite greeting. "Welcome to Meereen. We trust your journey was uneventful." Magister Ilario nodded, tone carefully respectful. "Indeed, quite smooth. We come bearing the well wishes of certain Volantine traders who see potential in the freed Confederation's open ports. We note your prohibition on slave cargo. That does not trouble us, as we prefer legitimate trade. We have no desire to provoke your formidable dragons." He flicked a wary glance at Ghost, uncertain if the direwolf was one such creature. Jon calmly explained freed Confederation rules. No slaver shipments, no forced labor, full respect for freed council's trade taxes. Ilario listened, occasionally interjecting to clarify that his faction in Volantis disliked the old Triarch's expansions. He insisted they sought only profit through fair exchange. Daenerys felt cautious optimism. A friendly Volantine faction could bolster freed commerce, reducing reliance on more dubious routes. She also recognized the risk that such envoys might mask infiltration by slaver loyalists or Iron Scepter conspirators. Nonetheless, open trade with Volantis could deter the city from supporting slavers. After an hour of cordial discussion, Ilario proposed a test route: a caravan of spices and cloth in exchange for freed-grown grains and fish, supervised by freed watchers to ensure no contraband. Daenerys and Jon agreed, seeing minimal risk if freed watchers carefully vetted each shipment. They set a future date for finalizing details, concluding the meeting amicably. As the Volantine envoy departed, freed scribes prepared a draft agreement. Dario whistled softly once they were gone, remarking how freed Confederation had become a major player in Essos's politics, attracting cautious overtures from powerful city-states. In the following days, freed watchers, guided by Torum, meticulously inspected the Volantine group's lodgings, verifying no hidden communications or suspicious items. They found nothing overtly incriminating. It seemed that at least these particular Volantine merchants were earnest about forging legitimate ties. Daenerys and Jon took heart, imagining a future where Freed Bay maintained broad commerce with multiple free cities, thus discouraging any single entity from backing slaver revanchists. Meanwhile, the freed envoys dispatched to Lys sent early letters back, describing a complex landscape. Some Lyseni indeed seethed at the freed Confederation's anti-slavery triumph, while others saw it as an inevitable shift in Essos's balance. The Iron Scepter's influence remained shadowy, rumored to operate in hidden mansions and bribe minor officials. The freed envoys had not uncovered direct plans for an invasion or sabotage yet, but they suspected it could be forthcoming. They urged Daenerys and Jon to remain alert. The freed Confederation thus existed in a tense equilibrium, forging new trade pacts with Volantis and others, staving off potential infiltration from Lys, ensuring no single threat blindsided them. Daenerys and Jon delegated day-to-day city matters more than before, letting freed councils handle local governance. Freed militias patrolled with growing confidence. The Targaryens supervised from above, like guardians, intervening only when crises flared or major reforms demanded their final say. Freed men and women thrived under this model, feeling both empowered and protected. One evening, Daenerys walked along Meereen's ramparts with Jon. The air tasted of salt and dust. Far below, freed fishermen's torches bobbed near the harbor. Overhead, Regal and Viserion circled lazily, scanning the dark waters. "It's been peaceful," Daenerys observed softly. "No sign of a great threat. Freed councils handle disputes. Our vow cements unity. Part of me wonders if this is the calm before a storm, or if we've genuinely shaped a lasting peace." Jon leaned against the parapet. "I share that wonder. We still have the Iron Scepter possibility, the undead rumors, the Grey Hands in Yunkai, but none have escalated yet. Perhaps we're truly succeeding." He paused. "If this peace endures, the freed can shape their destiny without us looming every moment." Would we remain here forever, or eventually pass the torch fully to freed councils? She gazed at him. We remain as long as freed men want us. But if the day comes they stand tall alone, we might consider where else our destiny calls. We're Targaryens, after all. The old dream of Westeros, or the possibility of confronting that rumored darkness beyond the wall, might call us one day. But we must ensure freed confederation won't collapse in our absence. He stroked her hand lightly. Agreed. We won't abandon them. But it's good that freed are learning to govern themselves with minimal interference. The confederation is more stable than we dared hope. That alone is cause for gratitude. She nodded, letting the desert wind tease her hair. Shadowfire, perched near the pyramid's top, let out a distant bellow. The watchfires glowed. Freed stevedores carried on late shifts at the docks. Daenerys felt a pang of satisfaction seeing normal life. No chain galled these people's necks. Instead, they carried on with everyday labors in a realm forged by dragons, freed will, and Targaryen guidance. She squeezed Jon's hand, grateful for the vow that bound them and for the realm they shared. Days turned into weeks, each passing with minimal alarm. The Freed Confederation even hosted small delegations from Karth and the Summer Islands, curious about potential trade. Meereen bustled with foreign merchants for the first time in decades, all abiding by freed laws. Astapor and Yunkai likewise thrived, freed farmland producing surplus grain, freed forges crafting steel for local militias. The freed vow at the top of it all anchored a sense that House Targaryen was stable and uncorrupted. Then, near the cusp of winter's turn, the freed envoys and lists sent a dire missive. The Iron Scepter was reportedly finalizing a pact with at least one Sellsword company to stage a large-scale infiltration of Slaver's Bay. They might pose as legitimate traitors or broken men fleeing tyranny, but in truth served the Iron Scepter's plan to undermine freed councils from within. The letter named no specific date or route, only that the infiltration might occur soon. Jon read the letter with Daenerys in the Great Pyramid's side chamber, Tormund and Daario present. The freed scribes hovered, anxious. Daenerys's brow creased. If they come in small groups disguised as refugees or traitors, we can't easily block them at the gates. Freed law encourages open commerce. We can't bar entry to random travelers without fueling paranoia. But the Iron Scepter hopes to exploit that generosity. Jon exhaled. We can't revert to closed borders. That would betray freed principles. Instead, we must heighten vigilance. Freed watchers, stricter checks for contraband or suspicious behavior. If these infiltrators try to stir chaos or bribe freed leaders, we clamp down. But we must do so without strangling the freed openness we've nurtured. Daario drummed his fingers on the table. We Second Sons can bolster freed watchers, patrolling coastal landings. The freed councils might not love it, but in these times a bit more scrutiny is needed. Meanwhile, your dragons remain the ultimate deterrent if open violence erupts. Tormund nodded gravely, adding, prepare freed minds as well. Remind them that not all visitors are friend or foe, but cunning foes may hide among them. Encourage freed councils to swiftly report suspicious activities. If infiltration fails to gain traction among freed, it fizzles out. Daenerys agreed. Yes, let's instruct freed councils in each city to remain calm but watchful. We'll direct freed watchers to screen arrivals. We do so politely, ensuring no harassing of genuine travelers. We'll not let the Iron Scepter sow fear or undermine freed goodwill. Within days, each city ramped up discreet security. Freed watchers manned the gates with gentle vigilance. Freed scribes monitored records of new arrivals. Freed merchants were asked to remain alert for suspicious deals. Daenerys and Jon circulated public messages explaining the need for heightened watchfulness without restricting freed daily life. Reaction was mixed. Many freed supported it if it prevented slaver subversion, while a few worried it might lead to oppression. Daenerys reassured them that House Targaryen opposed all tyranny, including tyranny disguised as safety. Freed men accepted it, trusting her track record. No immediate infiltration manifested. The Freed Confederation carried on as usual, though each city braced for potential trickery. A freed militia officer in Astapor reported 2 suspicious caravans that turned out to be legitimate merchants from Pentos. Yunkai's freed watchers stopped a group of travelers carrying hidden weapons, but they claimed to be mercenaries seeking honest work. Investigation found no direct link to the Iron Scepter, so they were let in under close watch. The tension simmered, but no explosion occurred. One dusk, Daenerys and Jon stood on a Meereen balcony, once again savoring the city's hum. A freed scribe arrived, breathless, announcing an urgent messenger from Braavos had come to the city gates. Braavos? Daenerys exchanged a glance with Jon. We have no formal alliance with Braavos, but they are known for their aversion to slavery. Perhaps they come to explore trade or something else entirely. They agreed to meet the Braavosi messenger in a modest receiving room, freed guards posted discreetly. The messenger was a slender man clad in plain browns, a swirl of sea salt clinging to his cloak. He bowed. My name is Arwen, sent by certain Braavosi merchants who admire your freed confederation. But I also bear word from the Iron Bank, which watches developments across Essos. They have concerns about the freed confederation's impact on certain outstanding debts from slaver families. The bank wonders if you intend to hamper debt collection or any old financial instruments. His tone was careful, neither hostile nor friendly. Daenerys frowned. We do not meddle in foreign debts. If slaver families owe money to the Iron Bank, that is not freed confederation's domain. However, if the Iron Bank expects us to honor slavers' debts or enforce them, that is another matter. We will not subjugate freed men to repay slaver obligations. Jon folded his arms. We also note that if slaver families remain exiles, we do not block the bank from pursuing them. But the Freed Confederation rejects any notion that freed communities owe anything to slaver debts. Arwen nodded solemnly. I will convey your stance. The Iron Bank rarely invests in lost causes, but they watch potential influences. Some slaver families might approach the bank seeking funds to undermine you. If the bank refuses or remains neutral, those families might turn to more desperate means. My masters in Braavos caution you to remain alert for infiltration by slaver-backed forces. The bank itself claims neutrality, yet we all know their gold shapes wars and alliances. Dario smirked from the side. We are quite aware. If the Iron Bank or its agents meddle in freed affairs, we'll respond accordingly. But we appreciate the warning. Arwen bowed again, offering a small sealed letter from his Braavosi patrons praising freed trade possibilities. He concluded with, My personal inclination is to see you succeed. Braavos admires those who break chains. But I also warn you that some in Braavos remain uncertain whether your freed confederation might upset the balance of power in Essos. They watch carefully. May you stand strong. He departed, freed guards escorting him politely to the harbor. Daenerys exhaled. So Braavos is wary but not openly hostile. The Iron Bank stands neutral unless slaver families approach them for war funds. That's consistent with everything we know. Another reason we remain vigilant. Jon offered a grim nod. Between that and the Iron Scepter, we see multiple potential threats swirling. The Freed Confederation is stable for now, but the outside world bristles. Let's keep forging internal unity. If external foes do strike, we'll face them with dragons, freed armies, and unwavering resolve. Days melted into weeks again. Each sunrise a tapestry of freed trade caravans, council debates, and the hum of everyday life. Daenerys and Jon devoted energy to finalizing a freed confederation charter that further detailed local autonomy, trade laws, and mutual defense. Freed scribes produced copies for each city, distributing them among influential freed guilds and farmer collectives. The freed vow at the Confederation's helm remained an unspoken reassurance. The Targaryen guardians who broke chains would not abandon them. Freed families who once cowered now dared to dream of stable lives, building homes or farmland for future generations. The freed even developed small cultural festivals in each city, celebrating a year or more of liberation. Yunkai held a festival of threads, showcasing freed weavers' vibrant cloths. Astapor launched a fish harvest festival. Meereen staged a display of freed artistry with sculptures depicting shattered whips. One evening, Daenerys stood at the top of the pyramid, scanning the city lights with Jon. Shadows flickered across the sprawl. They reflected on the freed festivals, remembering how they once had to fight for each city's liberation. As they reminisced, a freed runner appeared, breathless, summoning them to the main hall. A visitor had arrived unexpectedly, a man in a cloak bearing the sigil of House Stark. Daenerys froze. Jon felt his heart lurch. House Stark? Could Ned Stark have dispatched an agent? They hurried downstairs, freed guards flanking them. In the hall, they found a lone Westerosi man in travel-worn leathers, black hair streaked with gray. He carried no visible weapon aside from a sheathed dagger. Freed scribes hovered uncertainly. As Daenerys and Jon approached, the man bowed, revealing a polite but guarded countenance. "My name is Hallis Malin, once in service to Lord Eddard Stark. He sends me with tidings and an invitation. I come in peace." Jon, chest tight, asked calmly, "Does Ned Stark's letter mention urgent matters? Why risk such a journey across the narrow sea?" Freed watchers parted to let the man speak. Hallis nodded. "Aye, it's urgent enough. King Robert's health falters, some say from too many hunts and feasts. The realm teeters with court intrigues. Lord Eddard fears that if Robert dies, certain powers in King's Landing might attempt an attack on House Targaryen, believing you a threat. Lord Eddard also warns that if winter truly brings an undead menace, we might all need to unite. He invites you or your envoys to Parley in White Harbor, a neutral meeting on northern soil, far from the Lannisters' stronghold. He wrote a missive for your eyes only." The man produced a sealed parchment with a direwolf crest. Daenerys and Jon exchanged glances, freed scribes leaning in with curiosity. This was a moment that could reshape their future. If Ned Stark truly invited them to Parley in White Harbor, it signaled that not all Westeros was hostile. Daenerys stepped forward, accepting the parchment. She broke the seal carefully. The freed guards gave them space as she and Jon read the contents. Indeed, it reiterated Hallis's words. Robert's declining health, court factions eyeing Targaryens as scapegoats, the need to unify if the undead threat proved real. Ned proposed a discreet meeting in White Harbor's port under the protection of House Manderly, hopefully free from Lannister spies. Daenerys's hand trembled slightly. She recalled how long they had shaped Slaver's Bay. Now an invitation to cross the narrow sea for diplomacy? The freed confederation was stable, but was it stable enough for them to risk leaving? She looked to Jon. He read the letter with a taut expression. If we ignore Ned's plea, we might miss a chance to avert a future war. Yet if we go, it's a gamble. The freed confederation might endure without us for a time, but if we vanish too long or if Westeros betrays us, freed unity might be shaken. Tormund spoke softly from behind. Lawloress Flame has sometimes hinted at a union of ice and fire beyond the seas. Perhaps this is part of that design. Yet indeed, leaving freed lands must be done with caution. Dario frowned. You trust northern lords to keep you safe from Lannisters or any who want Targaryen heads. This could be a trap. But if Ned Stark is honorable, maybe it's genuine. Daenerys exhaled. We can approach this carefully. We might sail with a small retinue, plus a dragon or two for protection. Enough to deter betrayal, not so many as to seem an invading force. Meanwhile, freed councils continue their governance. If the trip is short, freed society won't unravel. Grey Worm, Dario, and Tormund remain to safeguard the realm. We can keep Shadowfire or the smaller dragons at our side, ensuring no one in Westeros tries anything rash. Or we bring more than one dragon to show we won't be cornered. The question is, do we both go, or just one of us? Jon met her eyes. If only one goes, it signals a lesser commitment. Yet if both Targaryens vanish, freed confederation might feel abandoned. But freed men might prefer we travel together to present a united front in Westeros. Freed councils are strong enough to rule in our absence, especially if Tormund, Dario, and Grey Worm coordinate. We can leave instructions. Any major threat arises, we return swiftly by sea with dragons overhead. Daenerys considered carefully. Yes, that might be best. The freed vow stands, but we cannot ignore potential calamities in Westeros. If the undead rumors hold any truth, ignoring them is reckless. Let's do it. We accept Ned's invitation, traveling lightly. We bring 1 or 2 dragons, enough to ensure our safety. Freed Confederation is stable enough for a short absence. Torrum inclined his head, though concern etched his features. I will remain, ensuring freed councils keep the unity. If trouble arises, we can send swift ravens. Return at once if needed, and watch yourselves in Westeros. Dario smirked, crossing his arms. I'd like to accompany you, but likely your freed vow presence is enough. I'll stay, ensuring no infiltration or revolt tears freed society. Grey Worm will handle day-to-day policing. We'll be fine. Just don't let Westeros do something foolish like luring you into a lion's den. Have a dragon overhead each day you're there. A not-so-subtle warning. Jon nodded. We'll do exactly that. The Freed Confederation stands. Let's finalize who oversees Meereen, Astapor, and Yunkai in the interim. A freed tri-council can convene in Meereen if needed. We'll inform them of our journey's rationale, vow to return swiftly unless Westeros truly demands our presence for a longer negotiation. So began a flurry of preparations. Over the next fortnight, Daenerys and Jon meticulously arranged freed governance in their absence. A special freed assembly convened in Meereen, with delegates from all 3 cities, to confirm that the Targaryens were not abandoning them but responding to a potential threat from Westeros. Freed men trusted them, though some worried about sabotage. Torrum, Dario, and Grey Worm took leadership roles, each focusing on defense, trade, and spiritual unity, respectively. The Freed Council from Yunkai also pledged to maintain vigilance against infiltration, while Astapor's delegates assured they'd handle any internal strife. Daenerys and Jon decided to bring Rhaegal and Drogon on the journey, leaving Shadowfire behind as the ultimate deterrent for any slavers who might dare test freed lines while they were away. They reasoned that 2 younger dragons traveling was enough to ensure safety in Westeros, while Shadowfire's colossal presence steadied freed morale at home. Freed crafters prepared a stout caravel with reinforced decks to accommodate dragons if needed. Freed watchers would man the ship, loyal volunteers from across the Confederation eager to protect their guardians. Jon considered bringing Ghost, but decided it might be simpler to keep the direwolf in freed lands as an additional sign that House Targaryen's vigilance remained. However, at the last minute, Ghost refused to part from Jon, whining and circling the docks. Touched, Jon relented, allowing Ghost to board the caravel. Freed men marveled at the notion of a direwolf crossing the sea. Finally, the morning of departure arrived. Meereen's harbor bustled with freed onlookers, somber and hopeful at once. Daenerys and Jon stood at the dock, exchanging farewells with Dario, Torrum, and Grey Worm. The freed councils from each city had sent emissaries, ring small tokens of trust. From Yunkai, a bolt of vibrant freed-woven cloth. From Astapor, a wooden statuette of a broken whip entwined with a dragon's tail. From Meereen, a cask of fine wine produced by freed vineyards outside the city. The Freed Confederation's love was evident, though an undercurrent of anxiety rippled. They had never known a time without Targaryen oversight since liberation. Jon and Daenerys each reassured them that they would return. If the undead threat was real, they might persuade Westeros to form an alliance. If it was not, they would at least avert war. Rhaegal and Drogon perched on the caravel's broad deck, snapping at fish freed fishermen offered. Ghost waited near the gangplank. The time to sail came swiftly. Daenerys embraced Torrum, urging him to keep freed society united. Jon shook hands with Dario, exchanging final instructions for freed watchers. Grey Worm saluted them both, vowing the Unsullied would hold the realm. Freed scribes shed tears, uncertain how long they'd be gone. The Targaryens boarded the caravel, freed sailors cast off lines, and the ship glided away from Meereen's familiar quays. A hush fell across the crowd. Daenerys and Jon stood at the stern, watching freed men wave from the docks, the harborside receding with each crest of gentle waves. Rhaegal flapped upward, taking flight, while Drogon remained on the deck, blinking in the sun. Ghost settled near Jon's feet, occasionally sniffing the salty breeze. The freed sailors adjusted sails, the wind carrying them eastward, around the southernmost point of Slaver's Bay, then north toward the narrow sea. The plan was to circle the Valyrian Peninsula at a safe distance from the Smoking Sea's cursed waters, eventually crossing near Volantis or Lys, then heading up the open waters that led to Westeros. They traveled in a modest retinue, a handful of freed watchers armed with spears, a freed scribe to record any diplomatic negotiations, and a few essential supplies for the dragons. As the sun climbed, Daenerys stood by the railing, hair lifting in the breeze, heart thrumming with anticipation and unease. Jon joined her, scanning the horizon. "We do this for peace," he reminded quietly. "For freed and all living souls if winter's menace is real." She leaned against him. "Yes, if Robert's court spares us war, we might stand as a bridge between freed Confederation and Westeros. Maybe, in time, freed ideals can spread further. Or if the undead loom, we unite for survival." She pressed her lips together, glancing back at the distant silhouette of Meereen's pyramids. "Yet part of me dreads leaving freed lands. So much could happen while we're gone." Jon rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They are ready. We taught them. The freed vow remains strong. Even if a threat arises, Shadowfire is there. Dario and Grey Worm won't let slavers slip in easily. Let's trust them." The first days at sea were calm, with Rhaegal scouting overhead and Drogon perched, occasionally fluttering to snatch fish from the waves. Ghost prowled the deck, uncertain about the rolling motion. Freed sailors kept respectful distance from the dragons, though their curiosity was clear. Daenerys and Jon took turns reviewing the letter from Ned Stark, speculating on how White Harbor might receive them. They decided to approach from the vantage of an alliance, not suppliance. Let Ned Stark or House Manderly see that Targaryen stood for freed men, not conquest. If Robert insisted on hostility, they'd show him a sample of dragon might. As the caravel navigated past the southwestern tip of the Valyrian Peninsula, the waters grew choppy. The freed watchers kept vigil day and night, wary of pirates or hidden reefs. Daenerys often rode Rhaegal in short flights, scanning the seas for any sign of trouble. Jon occasionally took Drogon aloft, letting the younger dragon test flight at extended distances. Ghost disliked these aerial excursions, remaining on deck, whining until Jon returned. Each morning they studied charts freed scribes had compiled. One freed scribe named Alseth was particularly adept at navigating old Valyrian waters, though haunted by stories of cursed ruins. They steered well clear of the Smoking Sea's peril, hugging safer routes. Now and then, freed watchers glimpsed faint outlines of broken towers on the horizon, relics of Valyria's doom. Even from a distance, the place exuded an eerie hush. Daenerys averted her gaze, mindful that Rhaegar once believed ancient prophecies lay in Valyria's ashes. She whispered a silent thanks that she had no reason to linger in that haunted domain. Days stretched into weeks. They encountered a few merchant ships, some from Karth or the Summer Islands. Those showed polite deference at the sight of dragons overhead. Daenerys hailed them from Rhaegal's back, offering greetings, and freed watchers on deck noted no hostility. At last, they turned north, crossing wide waters that gradually cooled. The winds brought a sharper bite, reminding Jon of northern climes. Ghost seemed more content with the cooler breeze, bounding along the deck. Daenerys found it refreshing, though she asked freed sailors for a cloak to ward off the chill. Rhaegal and Drogon adapted, diving to fish or resting on the ship's rails. Freed watchers sometimes stifled laughter when Drogon's half-grown wings flapped wildly, splashing them with salt spray. After many days, they spotted the western shoreline. Freed sailors recognized the general area. Lands south of Lys, though the city itself lay further east. Daenerys recalled the warnings about the Iron Scepter possibly lurking in Lys, but they had no cause to stop there, nor any illusions about waltzing into that city uninvited. They gave it a wide berth, continuing north. Freed watchers remained alert for suspicious vessels. None appeared. Occasionally, they glimpsed ships from Tyrosh or the Stepstones, but no confrontation arose. The freed scribes joked that the Targaryens' reputation preceded them, dissuading any foolish interference. Jon considered that a blessing, though he never dropped his guard. One crisp morning, the freed watchers announced they approached the sea lanes leading to Westeros. The sky turned a steely gray, the wind sharper, the waters choppier. Jon felt a strange flutter of memory. He had grown up believing Westeros was the only realm that mattered, that beyond the narrow sea lay alien lands. Now, returning in reversed roles, he was the foreign presence, bringing dragons to a land that once exiled or hunted Targaryens. Ghost sensed his tension, leaning against his leg. Daenerys came to his side, silently reading his mood. He squeezed her hand, recalling the freed vow that anchored them. They faced whatever awaited them in Westeros together. Late the next day, freed watchers spotted the southern coasts of Dorne, the land of deserts and rocky hills. Daenerys gazed at it with mixed feelings, recalling how House Martell once allied with Targaryens. The freed scribes suggested they steer wide, continuing along the coast until they reached the mouth of the river near White Harbor in the far north. The journey could take another week or more. Daenerys agreed. The freed watchers carefully navigated away from any major Dornish ports, mindful that they had no direct alliance with House Martell. They pressed on, each day scanning for any Westerosi warships. None appeared, though freed watchers occasionally glimpsed small fishing vessels. Jon soared overhead with Drogon at times, ensuring no surprise ambush. The water chilled further, the sky often cloudy. Ghost huddled in a sheltered corner of the deck. Rhaegal exhaled puffs of mist whenever he breathed. Freed sailors joked that the dragons disliked the cold. Daenerys found it bracing, reminding her that winter might truly be near. One dawn, freed watchers awakened Jon and Daenerys, announcing they had rounded the cape leading into the waters off the Vale. The freed scribes consulted charts, concluding that if they maintained course, they would approach White Harbor in about 4 days. The mood on the caravel turned solemn. They were truly entering Westerosi domain. Daenerys took to the sky on Rhaegal, scanning the horizon for any sign of ships bearing the crowned stag sigil or Lannister lions. She saw only gulls and the occasional merchant cog. On deck, freed watchers sharpened weapons, prepared for contingencies. Another day of sailing brought them near the coast. Cliffs rose from the sea, dotted with pine forests. The freed scribes recognized them from rough Westerosi maps. They were indeed nearing the north. At dusk, Daenerys and Jon stood at the prow, the wind biting their cheeks. Ghost crouched behind them, nose twitching at foreign scents. Drogon perched on the rigging, swishing his tail. Rhaegal circled overhead, a silent sentinel. Freed sailors sang low tunes, attempting to calm nerves. The next morning, a chill fog blanketed the sea, making navigation tricky. Freed watchers peered from the crow's nest, calling out glimpses of rocky outcrops. By midday, the fog parted enough to reveal a broad river mouth leading inland, the White Knife which flowed to White Harbor. The freed scribes conferred, saying that if Ned Stark's invitation was sincere, they should steer upriver, announcing themselves at the harbor. Daenerys and Jon agreed. They proceeded carefully, freed watchers scanning the shores. Forested banks lined the river, though scattered hamlets dotted the region. The temperature sank further, breath forming faint clouds in the air. The dragons fluttered in agitation. Drogon occasionally hissed at the cold water. Freed sailors teased him with morsels of salted fish. Ghost paced restlessly. After half a day of cautious navigation upriver, freed watchers spotted a fortress looming on the horizon, banners of House Manderly, white mermen on a sea-green field, visible on the walls. The freed caravel slowed, uncertain how the harbor officials would react. A horn blast echoed from the fortress, presumably White Harbor's watchers spotting the dragon-laden ship. Freed watchers responded with a single horn call, signifying peaceful intent. Tension coiled among Daenerys' crew. Would the Northern Lords greet them with caution or hostility? Soon, a small harbor patrol boat emerged, flying House Manderly's banner. They approached the caravel and freed watchers dropped rope ladders. A pair of Manderley guards climbed aboard, eyes wide at the sight of a black dragon perched on the rigging and another green one flapping overhead. They bowed awkwardly to Daenerys and Jon, identifying themselves as men of Lord Wyman Manderley. They said they had been forewarned of a possible Targaryen arrival by Ned Stark's messages. They requested that Daenerys and Jon dock at the main quay, promising safe passage. Daenerys offered a polite nod. "We come at Lord Eddard Stark's invitation. We mean no harm. Our dragons are under our control, and our freed watchers are disciplined." The Manderley guards exchanged uneasy glances but accepted it, guiding the freed caravel to an assigned berth. As they neared the docks, crowds of Northmen gathered, curious about the rumored Targaryens. Some gasped at the dragons overhead, a sight not seen in Westeros for many generations. Freed watchers stood firm, hands on spears. Jon felt a swirl of emotions, recalling his youth in the north, now returning as a Targaryen champion with dragons. They disembarked onto the quay. A line of Manderley knights formed a corridor. At the far end stood Lord Wyman Manderley himself, large and imposing, flanked by a few highborn retainers. Beside them stood Hallis Malin, the messenger who had first come to Meereen, and another figure wearing the direwolf sigil, presumably a Stark retainer. Daenerys and Jon approached with measured dignity, Drogon flapping overhead. Rhaegal soared in wide circles, surveying the fortress. Freed watchers followed, casting nervous looks at the many armed northerners. Ghost prowled at Jon's side, hackles slightly raised. Lord Manderley offered a deep bow. "Welcome to White Harbor, Daenerys Targaryen, Jon." "Targaryen?" He paused, unsure of the correct address. "We greet you under the protection of House Stark, who has arranged for your safety here. I pray the crossing was kind." Daenerys's voice was calm. "We thank you for the courtesy. We come as guests, invited by Lord Eddard Stark. We carry no intention of conquest or aggression. Our freed watchers simply guard us from hidden threats. The dragons remain with us, but we will keep them from harming your people, so long as none threaten us." Wyman Manderley inclined his head. "Much obliged. Lord Stark is en route from Winterfell. He had urgent duties but intends to greet you personally. In the meantime, I've prepared chambers in the new castle for your party. We ask your watchers to remain close to the docks if feasible. Your dragons, well, they may roost outside the walls if that pleases you. White Harbor is not accustomed to creatures of such scale." Jon glanced at Daenerys. They exchanged a silent nod. "We'll keep Rhaegal and Drogon well outside city rooftops, presumably near a clear patch of ground," Jon explained. Freed watchers listened intently. Daenerys smiled faintly, adding that the freed watchers would abide by local courtesy as well. If all went smoothly, it might be a short stay. Thus, they were escorted to the new castle, a smaller fortification within White Harbor's walls, adjacent to the main fortress. Freed watchers set up a camp in the courtyard under watchful Manderley knights. Drogon and Rhaegal were coaxed to a wide field just outside the city gate, near the river. The dragons hissed at the cold, but Jon and Daenerys soothed them. Ghost prowled the castle halls, raising eyebrows among servants. The freed scribes marveled at the stark northern architecture, so different from Meereen's airy designs. That night, they dined with Lord Manderley, who regaled them with stories of the North's traditions. Daenerys and Jon reciprocated with tales of freed confederation and how they broke the slavers' grip. Wyman listened politely, though the notion of entire cities run by ex-slaves evidently unsettled him. Still, he recognized Ned Stark's strong recommendation to show courtesy, and so courtesy prevailed. 2 days later, Ned Stark arrived, accompanied by a small retinue of Stark men. He came unarmored, exuding the quiet dignity Jon remembered from childhood. Seeing Jon not as Snow but as Targaryen champion unsettled Ned's eyes with a flicker of regret, but he masked it. They met in a private hall, freed watchers stationed outside, Manderley knights discreetly posted as well. Daenerys and Jon greeted him calmly. Ned's gaze lingered on Jon, emotion swirling. "You've grown beyond anything I imagined," Ned said quietly, voice thick. I see you carry the name Targaryen now. You and Daenerys have built a realm in Essos I scarcely believed possible. I came to ensure there need be no war with King Robert. Daenerys responded gently. We have no quarrel with Robert unless he forces one. Our freed confederation stands for liberation, not conquest. We accepted your invitation in hopes of peace and, if needed, alliance. If Winter's rumors about the undead are true, we must unite, not bicker over old claims. Ned nodded gravely. I believe that as well. Robert's health declines. The Lannisters circle him with ambition. Some whisper that if Targaryens are rising in Essos, the throne must act preemptively. I have so far dissuaded him, but if he dies, or if the Lannisters gain control, you might face a royal decree labeling you enemies of the crown. Jon breathed in, recalling the freed confederation's vulnerabilities. We defend ourselves, but it would cost many lives on both sides. We prefer to avoid that horror. Is there a path to an official non-aggression pact? Ned's lips pressed thin. Perhaps if Robert sees you pose no immediate threat to Westeros, we can formalize a treaty. But that requires more open diplomacy. The Lannisters will sabotage any such attempt if they see advantage in war. Tywin Lannister might view your dragons as too dangerous to exist. If Robert dies and the Lannisters hold the regency for Prince Joffrey, they might push for conflict. My best hope is to keep Robert stable and reasoned, but time is uncertain. Daenerys set her jaw. We stand ready if forced to fight, but we'd prefer a peaceful accord. We vow not to sail west with an army. Our freed confederation is no threat, but if they strike us, we will unleash dragons to protect freed men. That is unnegotiable. Ned accepted that calmly. Understood. I share your wish for no war. If this undead threat emerges, King's Landing might be forced to reevaluate priorities. The realm can't war on dragons while ice wraiths roam, but many lords remain skeptical of such legends. The Night's Watch begs for help, yet the Crown's ears are deaf. If you believe in R'hlloreth's visions, any help you can offer the Wall might prove vital. Torrhen, who had joined them, stepped forward. R'hlloreth's flame indeed sometimes reveals a great darkness in the far north. We do not dismiss it, but the freed realm can't march on rumors alone. We'd need proof or a clear call. Ned looked pained. Yes, I can't provide more than scattered accounts from men who returned from beyond the Wall. I do know winter grows close. The cold could awaken ancient evils. Let us remain in contact. If we confirm the threat, we'd plead for your dragon's aid. House Stark stands by its word. Over the next days, Daenerys, Jon, and Ned hammered out a draft of an informal treaty that recognized House Targaryen's freed confederation as a non-belligerent entity. Ned would present it to Robert, seeking the king's signature. It promised that no Targaryen force would invade Westeros unless provoked, and in return, the Iron Throne would not dispatch armies to Essos to crush the freed confederation. They also included a clause about sharing intelligence if the undead threat materialized. Ned cautioned that Robert might be swayed by Lannister whispers. The best outcome was uncertain. Still, the presence of 2 dragons in White Harbor gave Ned some leverage, for local lords saw the potential devastation if war were declared. House Manderly, at least, recognized that Targaryens possessed unstoppable might if cornered. During these negotiations, freed watchers patrolled the harbor, while Rhaegal and Drogon perched outside the walls. Ghost stalked the corridors of the new castle, occasionally startling Manderly servants. Daenerys and Jon kept their freed scribes close, ensuring no miscommunication. Hallis Malin, the Stark retainer who had first visited Meereen, confirmed that the treaty was an unprecedented step. If Robert refused to sign, it meant the realm might drift toward conflict. Daenerys concluded her time in White Harbor with a cautious sense of possibility. She and Jon decided not to linger. Ned Stark agreed to deliver the treaty draft to King's Landing. If Robert was willing, an official envoy might sail to Meereen. If not, they had done all they could to avert open hostilities. Their departure was subdued. Ned parted with Jon in a private moment, acknowledging the painful truth of Jon's Targaryen parentage. Jon expressed gratitude for Ned's raising him as a Stark, even if it was built on secrets. Ned apologized for the burdens, but recognized that Jon had found a path as more than a bastard, forging a freed realm that might one day stand as an ally. They embraced briefly, ghosts of the past lingering. Then Daenerys and Jon boarded their freed caravel, Rhaegal and Drogon soared overhead, and they slipped back down the White Knife to the open sea. The freed watchers on deck cast wary glances behind, relieved no eye. Immediate conflict arose. The voyage back to Slaver's Bay was swift, aided by favorable winds. Rhaegal and Drogon hunted fish, Ghost grew restless with the sea travel. Freed scribes recorded every detail of the negotiations. Daenerys mused about the uncertain future. If Robert died and the Lannisters seized power, war might be inevitable. If the undead threat proved real, they might be called across the sea again. But for the moment, freed Confederation needed them. She and Jon hoped that the Iron Scepter's infiltration had not escalated in their absence. Each day, freed watchers scanned the horizon. The seas remained calm. Upon reaching Meereen, freed men on the docks cheered at the sight of the returning caravel. Daario stood waiting with a grin, Torrham and Grey Worm by his side. Daenerys and Jon disembarked to a storm of questions. How did Westeros greet them? Was there a treaty? Did the rumored undead overshadow the realm? Daenerys summarized in modest detail. They met Ned Stark, drafted a potential peace, uncertain if King Robert would sign. Freed scribes heaved sighs of relief that no immediate war loomed. Meanwhile, freed watchers confirmed no major infiltration had occurred in their absence. The freed Confederation still thrived. Over the following weeks, Daenerys and Jon found themselves seamlessly reintegrated into freed governance. The freed Tri-Council briefed them on small crises. A minor drought near Yunkai's farmland, a spat between Astapor fisher guilds, and the Grey Hands continuing to criticize Targaryen paternalism but not inciting violence. All manageable. The freed Confederation overcame each hurdle with growing confidence. Daenerys and Jon maintained readiness for any shock from Westeros or Lys, but neither arrived. The freed envoy in Lys reported that the Iron Scepter seemed to be delaying action, perhaps biding time or lacking consensus. One evening, as the desert air cooled, Daenerys and Jon shared a quiet meal on a balcony of the Great Pyramid. Ghost lay at Jon's feet, well-fed. Drogon lounged on a ledge overhead, occasionally stretching his wings. Freed lights glittered below, music drifting from a corner of the city. Daenerys sipped a light wine from Astapor's new vineyards, considering how different this was from the days they stormed these cities. We've gone from conquerors to caretakers, from watchers on the ramparts to cultivators of peace, she murmured. Sometimes I can't believe how normal it feels to see freed families thriving in these streets. Jon smiled gently. It's the reward for all that labor and risk. Freed men needed guardians, and we rose to the task. Now they begin to stand on their own. Perhaps we approach the day we can step back more fully, letting freed rule themselves without daily Targaryen oversight. She brushed her hand over his. Perhaps, yet I sense we remain crucial symbols. Our vow unites freed hearts. A day might come, though, when we face a bigger threat. If the undead or Westeros or the Iron Scepter truly makes a move. He nodded, gaze drifting to the starry sky. We stand ready, and if none of those storms breaks, then Freed Bay might see a generation of peace, shaping its destiny in harmony. We can remain or wander as we choose, but our vow to Freed will never be undone. They lingered on the balcony, content to watch the stars and the city lights. Ghost dozed, Drogon rumbled overhead. The freed Confederation slumbered peacefully, untroubled by the ghosts of old slaver oppression. For now, the Targaryens had fashioned a realm where children woke to no whips, no chains, only the memory of liberation. The freed vow that bound Daenerys and Jon likewise bound them to these lands, forging an improbable destiny. Once the world exiled them, but in Slaver's Bay they found a home shaped by fire and compassion. Time flowed, carrying the freed Confederation through minor trials. The Basilisk pirates stayed at bay, possibly deterred by word of dragons. Yunkai's freed militia dispersed the Grey Hands after they attempted a rally that turned violent, arresting only those who instigated attacks. The freed councils discovered that open dissent was permissible, but violence was not. Daenerys praised them for handling it without Targaryen intervention, proving freed governance could stand on its own. The ambassadors returned from lists with cautionary tales of the Iron Scepter's internal strife, suggesting they might be paralyzed by infighting for now. No direct assault materialized. Freed watchers remained on alert, though. Meereen's harbor welcomed more ships from Braavos and Volantis, some bearing news that King Robert Baratheon still clung to life, though rumors suggested heavy drinking and hunts wore him down. Ned Stark's letter never arrived. Possibly he was mired in King's Landing politics, or the Lannisters had intercepted any attempt at a treaty. The freed Confederation had to accept that they might remain in uneasy equilibrium with Westeros until Robert died or something else broke the stalemate. Daenerys occasionally mused about traveling west again, but each time decided freed stability took precedence unless Westeros itself clarified its stance. One late afternoon, Daenerys walked through the plaza near the old fighting pits, now transformed into a freed bazaar. Bright awnings covered stalls selling woven goods, fish, spiced meats, and clay crafts. Freed families bustled, children darting between booths. She smiled as she passed freed men who bowed or waved. The air smelled of cumin, fried onions, and sweet peppers. Freed scribes accompanied her, noting any concerns. Jon had remained in the pyramid to meet with Tormund about a new cross-city militia schedule. Ghost, curiously enough, prowled the plaza as well, delighting freed children who offered him scraps. Daenerys paused at a stall where a freed woman proudly displayed intricately painted ceramics depicting dragons interwoven with broken chains. She asked about the designs, commending the artistry. The woman blushed, stammering that she drew inspiration from the vow of House Targaryen. Daenerys took a moment to buy a small dish, intending to surprise Jon. She placed a few copper coins in the woman's hand, freed scribes verifying the fair price. The freed woman beamed as Daenerys carefully wrapped the dish. In that unremarkable gesture, Daenerys saw tangible proof that freed life thrived, shaping new crafts and symbols. This was what she had fought for. Not endless war, but everyday joys freed from oppression. She resumed her walk, freed scribes trailing. A hush of gratitude settled in her heart. Returning to the pyramid near sunset, she found Jon in the courtyard, kneeling to feed Drogon a chunk of goat. The younger dragon spat flames around the meat, cooking it on the spot. Rhaegal soared overhead, dropping a small fish at Jon's feet. He laughed, tossing it to Drogon as well. Ghost hovered on the sidelines, apparently uninterested in cooked goat. Daenerys approached, producing the painted dish from the small pouch at her waist. She extended it to Jon. "For you, a freed artisan's work, inspired by the vow we share." He took it gently, examining the swirling depiction of a red-black dragon coiled around shattered shackles. His gaze warmed. "It's beautiful. Thank you." He rose, pressing a light kiss to her forehead. Freed scribes averted their eyes with smiles, used to such displays. Daenerys glanced at the sky. "Has Tormund concluded the militia schedule? I want to confirm we're aligned. Then we can dine quietly. I'm weary from city rounds." Jon gestured inside. He left the proposals on a table in the hall. "I think you'll approve them." Rotating freed officers from each city, stationed in Meereen on a monthly rotation. "Let's finalize it and call it a day." They headed inside, freed scribes following. As they walked, Daenerys couldn't help reflecting on how normal it all felt. She, once a frightened girl sold to a Dothraki call, now strolled with confidence through a city she liberated, building systems for freed militia. The freed vow that tethered her to Jon also underpinned an entire realm's stability. If only Viserys could have set aside bitterness, he might have stood beside them. But that ship had sailed. The days that followed brought mild concerns. A rumor of golden priests from Karth wanting to observe freed society, potential friction between freed fishermen and Yunkai traders, small disputes about farmland boundaries. None escalated into crisis. Freed councils handled them. Daenerys and Jon mostly supervised, stepping in only for major arbitration. Freedmen in Astapor proudly declared a new freed festival of the sea. Yunkai boasted a freed weaving competition. Meereen's freed artisans developed a mid-year jubilee. The Freed Confederation blossomed with cultural expression. Dragons soared overhead, a watchful reminder that no slaver would ever again dominate these lands. Occasionally, Daenerys and Jon recalled their sojourn to White Harbor, wondering if Ned Stark had any success in pushing the peace treaty. No raven or courier arrived, implying either the Lannisters blocked it or Robert was unwilling. They could only wait. Meanwhile, the freed realm advanced in slow steps of prosperity. Freed farmland expanded, freed militias refined their training, freed children learned craft and literacy. The city squares brimmed with laughter, a sight once unthinkable under slaver tyranny. On a quiet dusk, Daenerys and Jon convened with Daario, Grey Worm, and Tormund in the pyramid's council chamber. Freed scribes quietly set out tea. Daenerys took a seat, resting her palms on the polished table. We seem to have reached a plateau of peace. Are we missing anything? Any infiltration signs from the Iron Scepter? Any slaver conspiracies creeping in? Tormund shook his head. All quiet. The freed envoys in Lys still monitor the Iron Scepter. They remain fractured, uncertain how to proceed. Possibly they fear your dragons. No major sabotage attempts. Freed watchers have apprehended no infiltration. The Grey Hands in Yunkai disbanded after their leaders were arrested for inciting violence. Astapor's freed are calm, running their own festivals. Meereen thrives. Grey Worm, stoic, added, militia rotations proceed smoothly. Freed cavalry across all cities coordinate well. We remain vigilant, but no active threats. The Basilisk pirates fade to rumor. The Painted Hills see no Dothraki. The Freed Confederation stands unchallenged. Daario smirked. A bit too peaceful, if you ask me, but I prefer it to constant battles. Our biggest issues these days are daily freed disputes about farmland or guild squabbles. Mundane, manageable. The freed vow stands strong. Daenerys and Jon exchanged a look of cautious relief. Then we can continue strengthening freed society. Let them govern more. If a bigger threat arises, we respond. Meanwhile, the freed flourish. Perhaps we truly have succeeded. Daenerys mused, voice tinged with wonder. After the meeting, Daenerys wandered the pyramid's corridors. Freed torches illuminated carvings of dragons once used by slavers to legitimize cruelty. Now freed artisans retooled them into symbols of liberation. She touched a carved relief, feeling the ridges of the etched flames. Footsteps approached behind her. Jon, who sensed her reflective mood. "Are you well?" he asked gently. She turned. "Just thinking how the Freed Confederation might, for all we know, endure for generations without needing us. That was always the goal, right? Yet it leaves me wondering about our next chapter if they truly no longer depend on us." Jon pressed a warm hand to hers. "We remain guardians for as long as Freed want us. We also watch the horizon for threats, like the undead or Westeros. If none emerges, we might simply be the watchers who ensure Freed remain safe. And that's enough, I think." Her eyes softened. "Yes, it is enough. And if one day freedmen elect new leaders who can stand entirely alone, we can step back. Maybe even see the wide world beyond. But for now, we're here, building an era of hope." They continued along the corridor, passing freed scribes who bowed. The hum of the city lulled beyond the walls. Ghost padded behind them, content in the hush. Rhaegal and Drogon roost outside on a wide terrace, occasionally craning necks to peer into windows. The freed vow that tied Daenerys and Jon likewise tied them to these lands, forging a tapestry of daily life from once bloody sands. The noise of distant laughter from freed children in the courtyard provided a comforting soundtrack. Seasons rolled on. Freed harvest cycles repeated. Daenerys and Jon never fully let their guard down, but no cataclysmic blow landed. The Freed Confederation system of shared militias, rotating council delegates, and open trade thrived. Lys's Iron Scepter remained disorganized, Bravos maintained polite neutrality, and the other free cities gradually recognized freed embargo on slavery. Robert Baratheon lingered on the throne, rumored to be ailing further. Ned Stark occasionally sent short letters relayed by Braavosi merchants, indicating no shift yet in King's Landing's official stance. If Robert died, the tension might flare, but for now it lay dormant. The undead rumors beyond the wall never manifested in any official call. The freed Confederation found itself at peace, an astonishing outcome after so many crises. Amid that serenity, Daenerys and Jon began delegating more power to freed councils. Freed Watchers patrolled effectively, freed militias answered local officials, freed commerce soared, freed courts handled justice. The Targaryens were consulted for major treaties or potential threats, but day-to-day life in Astapor, Yunkai, and Meereen no longer required their presence every hour. Freed men shaped their destiny, fulfilling the dream that Daenerys once held. A realm free of chains, forging itself from the ashes. She and Jon watched from the vantage of the pyramid's upper terrace, or soared over farmland on Rhaegal or Drogon, providing a reassuring presence but not micromanaging freed affairs. One crisp dawn, Daenerys and Jon stood again on the pyramid's highest balcony, scanning Meereen's skyline. The freed city glowed with the vigor of morning chores. Shadows of dragons glided across rooftops, a comforting sight rather than a fearful omen. Daenerys inhaled, feeling the subtle shift in the city's pulse. "We're close to the moment when freed truly governs themselves," she said quietly, turning to Jon. "We could remain as figureheads, but freed society no longer requires daily Targaryen intervention. Our vow stands, but the freed are grown." Jon's gaze roved over the awakening city. "Yes, they stand on their own feet now. If a threat arises, they'll call us. Otherwise, they flourish. We might linger as guardians or consider the next step." The undead rumors still niggle at me, though no sign emerged. Robert's uncertain state might breed new uncertainties. But the freed Confederation is strong enough to hold. She nodded. "Perhaps we shift to an even more symbolic role, letting freed councils take the reins fully. We remain in Essos for now, but more in the background. If the day comes when the freed Confederation is truly unassailable, we might roam west or north to see if we can help with any greater menace. Or simply exist as wanderers, free of the burdens of rule." Jon smiled, brushing his knuckles along her cheek. "We'll decide together. Our vow to freed remains, but freed men are no longer children. We can trust them to keep forging their destiny. Whether in a year or a decade, we might find ourselves exploring the wider world, perhaps crossing the sea again if Westeros calls, or staying here if freed desires it." She rested her forehead against his, gratitude coursing through her. The freed vow that once shaped entire realms also gave them the freedom to stand or depart as needed. They had never wanted to become tyrants or absolute rulers, only to end slavery and guide freed societies to self-determination. Now that dream neared fulfillment. From below, freed children's voices rose in laughter, a choir of hope. Dragons soared in the brightening sky. A new day in Slaver's Bay dawned, shaped not by whips but by the unshackled will of freed men and women. Daenerys took Jon's hand, a wry glint in her eye. "Shall we greet the freed council one more time, see how they fare without us meddling? Then we can plan the next phase of minimal oversight." He chuckled softly. "Yes, let's." A final assurance that freed Confederation truly stands on its own. "Then we might," he paused, face thoughtful. "We might consider a short journey to see if the undead threat truly remains silent, or if we should glean more from the night's watch." She kissed his knuckles. "One step at a time. Freed first, the rest of the world after." They departed the balcony, heading down the pyramid's corridors. Ghosts trotted at their heels, ears perked. Drogon circled above, letting out a playful roar. Freed scribes bowed in greeting, freed watchers saluted. The freed vow that bound Daenerys and Jon likewise bound them to these people's freedom, yet also allowed them to embrace their own. In the hush of that bright morning, as they prepared to meet the freed council, the promise of everything they had built shone like a sunrise, full of unspoken potential, dragons overhead, chains broken behind them, a realm at peace, and a vow that no matter where destiny led them next, the freed Confederation would endure as their proudest legacy.